Hello, my name is Joshua Gilliland, and I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. Getting excited for our 10th anniversary in July. We'll be at Comic-Con. We're going to have a good time there celebrating. More on that in the near future. But we're here to talk about Kenobi Episode 3. With me is Gabby Martin, Stephen Tolafield, and Thomas Harper. Three of whom I was just hanging out with at Star Wars Celebration. And three of whom I will also be, seeing at San Diego Comic-Con, minus one of those people. So with that, let's dig into Kenobi Episode 3. Gabby, since you haven't had a chance to talk Kenobi, everyone else has, your quick feelings about what you've seen with the first 3 episodes.
I mean, so I'm a millennial. Star Wars prequels, that was my intro to Star Wars. That is my heart, my soul. I will stand till the day I die. This was not giving what I wanted it to give. I'm not a fan. There have been some cool beats, especially in this 3rd episode. There were definitely some cool beats. But overall, not what I was expecting. Kind of let down a little bit. I see Stephen nodding. Hopefully he agrees with me, which I feel less alone. but no, I'm kind of in a little bit of a space where I'm a little disappointed because obviously I've been waiting kind of 15, 20 years to see Ewan McGregor back on my screen and Hayden Christensen back on my scene and at screen. And, it's not what I was expecting, to say the least.
So this is where, as the Gen Xer, this is everything I love. Stephen, as the other Gen Xer, your feelings, are we in the same camp? Is it an age thing?
It may be. I definitely am enjoying it. And I don't know, it may just be that this is a very different Obi-Wan from the one we're very conditioned to see from the prequels and from the Clone Wars, where he was just so, he's such a paragon of kind of wisdom and bravery, and he's at a point in his life where he's not exhibiting those traits, and it feels unfamiliar. So I can see why it's not what one would expect. But I like to be surprised in stories, and I'm enjoying the surprise. So yeah.
Thomas, you're younger than Stephen and I, so I'm curious where you fall onto the spectrum.
I fall right in the middle, I feel like. No, I don't like Feck, and we'll talk more about that, I suppose. I really don't like Feck. I don't like a little bit of order, and I don't agree with him. But no, I'm enjoying it overall. It managed to navigate the perilous straits in my brain of putting Obi-Wan and Vader together in a way that made sense for me. And I was prepared to like have it break canon and just be really upset with it. I was primed for that, in fact, but it pleasantly surprised me. I've enjoyed just the character study of Obi-Wan as a broken version of himself, and sort of ironic that some of the same people that criticize Luke and his characterization in The Last Jedi have no issue with Obi-Wan being portrayed in some of the same veins. But in any event, I'm enjoying it. It's one of those where they could probably have Ewan McGregor just like playing bridge in a Jedi retirement home, and I would be like all in for it.
Yeah. I think what I find the most endearing is Leia and Ben together. I also firmly believe that Leia had more adventures with Kenobi than Luke did. And that's why it really makes sense she would name her kid Ben. So just going to go out on a hunch there that, again, she seems to be having a whole bunch of adventures, which raise a whole bunch of legal issues. So let's jump into the law. We find out then on Mupuzo, and Thomas, as the trivia guy, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Sure. It's new as far as I know, so we're all in the same book. That's canon now, however you pronounced it.
Okay, so there's strip mining taking place here. We have legal definitions of strip mining and also laws that limit strip mining. So strip mining can mean, at least in Montana, the removal of the overburden and coal or other materials from the ground and all of the operations pertaining to the removal without the necessity providing timbers for the holding the ground in place. So it's not doing a tunnel, it's a open air pit. Now, there are laws on the books federally that limit strip mining. So we have the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act of 1977, which provides, in relevant part, any deed after August 3rd, 1977, and subject to valid exercising rights, no surface coal mining operations except those which exist on August 3rd, 1977, shall be permitted on any federal lands within the boundaries of a national forest. So what's that mean? When was a deed signed that included mining rights, specifically strip mining? Because strip mining, if you've seen it, is not pretty. So there are laws, both federal and state, that limit, like, hey, none of this because it's disgusting. You then get into water contamination. And there are cases that I briefly looked at that go to the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, where like a judge was recused because he owned land that was affected by strip mining taking place. And since he could have been a claimant, he could not preside over a case where water was getting contaminated that touched his property. So if they're doing that to the entire planet, that'd be bad. Have any of you dug into any strip mining issues?
That's
I'm
like
gonna
the
go-
first thing that I wake up and do every morning. Are you kidding me?
I have my
Strip
Westlaw
mining.
alerts. Yeah. What's doing strip lining today?
It's it's so the issue of imperial treatment of the environment is sort of a common beat here. And interestingly, at this point in the Star Wars timeline, the Empire is sort of full bore with this sort of thing across the galaxy. They're just focusing all their efforts on not just consolidating resources to build a big fleet and sort of replace and expand the Republic fleet, but they're building a Death Star. They've got that big battle station that needs to be built, needs all the resources that the galaxy has to offer. And it's pretty clear from the context of the episode that they've treated the planet in this way, in the exact sort of vein that led to the creation of some of these federal laws in the first place. These strip mining is bad, bad for the environment in a multitude of ways, and laws exist to rein that in. Those laws obviously don't seem to exist, at least in any relevant part that the Empire is paying attention to here. I also thought it was interesting that there was a comment, sort of an offshot line about the pre-existence of this planet being like a big farming planet. And that sounds like private farming, other people own the land, and now the Empire has sort of taken over, and it's not private citizens that are doing the mining for imperial supplies, it's the Empire doing it. And you start to wonder what happened to all those property rights that existed.
Yeah, it's a giant eminent domain issue. Now, granted, I don't think there was just compensation. There could have been the end of a blaster.
It seems unlikely that anyone got paid for their land.
Yeah, it probably ended badly. And but there's a big eminent domain issue. And you do see some cases where a private company could be administering a improvement being done. There are also cases where people get into trouble for that. In one town near me, they built the city took a bunch of property that was downtown and built a little shopping center and movie theater. Great for the local economy, but they made some boo-boos in how they did the eminent domain, and there was a very big lawsuit afterwards. Now, strip mining isn't as pretty or cool as like a downtown movie theater. And if you built a quarry in the middle of downtown, you're going to have problems with that. But it's, yeah, this planet seems to have been forcefully evicted, and there seems to be very few people there right now.
I don't know. I'd probably rather go to a quarry than go see like Morbius. So
If that was
don't rule it completely out.
if those were the two options, I agree. We're going to go see the
I'd
quarry.
rather work in a quarry than go sit for that movie.
Let's ruin a great character. Anyway, so let's talk about when we get our first view of the Inquisitor base, which has everything from a trophy case to a little underwater conference room to a whole bunch of stormtroopers there. And they've apparently killed younglings because there's one of those helmets on display, and they have lightsabers of Jedi that they've killed. But we see that there's a very rough working relationship between the fifth brother and Reva, to the point that he does a little force slam on her. And the lead chair seems to look like the tuning forks of Vader's castle. So there's got to be a reason for that. But it made me think of, is there a hostile working environment here that would fit the legal definition as opposed to just individuals who don't like each other? That the basis of the bad environment is not because of race or gender, it's because they're jerks. So that's the issue we have to wade into. Gabby, do you want to take the first swing on, is there a hostile working environment that's actually actionable?
Yeah, a common theme for me that I've been saying this in every kind of Star Wars breakdown, that the Empire is not where you want to work. From the Clone Wars episodes to Rebels to, anytime we see the Empire really in action as an office space, even an undercover boss with Kylo Ren, it is not a good working environment to live in or to work in at all. Although I would take a office style horror comedy of people working in the Empire. Like, give me undercover boss episodes, like a whole series of that. But yeah, no, it is a hostile work environment. We've seen, non-legally, right? And I think, I know you mentioned that there can't be a case made for race and gender, and it kind of brings up what's happening with the show, right, from a fan perspective with Moses Ingram, right, that she's getting this all this hatred as a Black woman, and Black actors in Star Wars have gotten this treatment. But what I find fascinating is she's kind of othered by the fifth brother, as she's not one of them. He kind of, I think in episode 2, kind of refers to her as like gutter trash or something. And so there's this kind of othering of her. What that other in the Star Wars universe is necessarily, I tend to think she's the youngling that we see in episode 1 at the beginning, as opposed to, the fifth brother's origin and the other Inquisitors, that maybe because she has a stronger connection to the Jedi, that's what kind of others her in this context. But depending on what that is, it's not named yet, could be something that puts her in a protected class in the Star Wars universe. And if he is being hostile towards her because of that protected class, she would certainly have a case. I mean, I don't think she's as concerned with him as she is about just moving up the ladder. But, she would definitely have a case. And let's talk about hostile work environment, that not even the supervisors are safe, that, the Grand Inquisitor just gets executed, summarily right off the top. And nobody seems very concerned about that he's just, kind of executed.
I don't think he's dead because of the comments the writers have made with "we will not break canon." So I think he's got a bad scratch, and
one of those back to tank miracles.
Yeah,
cauterized scratch right through him.
Or we get to see Jason Isaacs later as the Grand Inquisitor. Which would be a awesome way to end this with, here's the new Grand Inquisitor, and it's Jason Isaacs. That would solve all kinds of canon problems. if Grand Inquisitor 1 is dead. So, but we will find out. Turning to the racist comments that have happened the last week and those who stood up, anyone making racist comments seems to have missed the entire point of Star Wars. And they can't be a real fan if they've completely missed the point of the story. It's like, were you rooting for the bad guys? What's your deal with a story that highlights standing up for what is right, not going, I like the Nazis? Like, it's really appalling, the things that have happened. And McGregor's video statement was great. Anson Mount's tweet was fantastic. So there's been a lot of people who have rised up, who are in genre going, enough of this crap. And I just missed the point of the stories. And her presence is terrifying on multiple levels. When she goes into that base, the way she's strutting, I mean, talk about presence and power. Wonderfully filmed.
And I love the Inquisitors as villains. Trilla Sundari, is that her last name in Fallen Order? She just chewed the scenery, and I loved it. She was just such a campy villain, so great, and so I was really excited to see the Inquisitorius lair again, and all the other Inquisitors. Also the Inquisitors that showed up in Rebels too. Was it Second Sister? This was voiced by Sarah Michelle Gellar. They were great too. So I might say that there's a big if that Gabby identified whether Reva is sort of being singled out by a protected class. There's nothing illegal about workplaces just sucking. You can have a really terrible cutthroat workplace where everyone's just really competitive and people are kind of throwing each other under the bus left and right, as long as it's not based on someone's protected status. So if she is being singled out because of some protected status that she can control, like race, gender, national origin, the Inquisitorius might be a lawful place to work, which is really shocking to think about.
And
One.
Oh, go ahead, Thomas.
No, go ahead, Gabby.
No, I was going to say, you could argue that if she is a foundling and that the Jedi is, it's always been kind of billed as this kind of religion, especially in Rogue One, we saw it as a religion, right? That she could be, and if that's why they're singling her out, that is a very clear protected class of singling out somebody because of their religion, in that case a religion that they have now denounced, but that they're still singling her out for her background and ethnicity and her religion.
Yeah, I'm glad you went first, because as a bridge off of that thought, I think the opening scene of episode 1, where you see sort of a different view of Order 66, is going to come back and have some meaning. I don't know anything in particular about her like origin and whatnot, but I do wonder whether she's being singled out as someone who joined the Inquisitorius based on being a Padawan. She wasn't very high in the ranks, and so age, I don't know if being young is technically a protected class within this, but certainly you have at least the Grand Inquisitor that we know from Rebels was a former Temple Guard, the head of the Temple Guard. You have several others like Trilla, who's a great example. She was a Padawan, not a youngling, like what Reva may be, but sort of fell, but she was like right on the cusp of being a Jedi Knight. And so you could have a division that's there, that she's sort of the young buck, and there's dispersions cast on her for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is like the view of her powers, or the lack thereof, compared to some of the others that were more seasoned when they fell and turned. But I think that's one of the most curious parts of this whole show. Is finding out her backstory and the Inquisitorious beef here.
That we haven't seen an Inquisitor do the sing-songy voice to terrorize someone before, so she's got a sadistic streak that's unique. I mean, the second sister did some. Was it second or seventh? I get confused.
They both had their own ways.
Yeah, but again, Sarah Michelle Gellar's interactions with Ezra were creepy, like not okay type of behavior, and yeah. So again, they're fascinating villains. There's the question of will she make it out, but because we know a bunch who do make it out, but yeah, there's some big issues here. We also have in this the issue of hitchhiking. And which one of you added the hitchhiking point? Okay, Gabby, that's my Jedi. Hit me. Tell me what you found out with hitchhiking.
Yeah, so there are obviously no federal laws in the United States that restrict the ability to hitchhike outside of national parks. And it's a state by state thing. As of 2021, hitchhiking is actually only illegal in Delaware, Idaho, Nevada, New Jersey, and Utah. And actually in Connecticut, it's funny because as soon as I saw this in the outline that we were discussing it, if you drive down Route 15, the Merritt Parkway, you actually see signs that say it is illegal to hitchhike. And so it depends on where you're hitchhiking from in Connecticut. So in Connecticut, it's you soliciting a ride from anyone other than a bus or a cab while in the road is an infraction punishable by a $35 fine. Except in the case of an accident or emergency, right? If your car breaks down or something like that. However, you can solicit a ride from the shoulder of the road, and depending on where you're at. So it's interesting because moving from Florida to Connecticut, I'd never seen hitchhiking signs before, but here in Connecticut, we have hitchhiking signs on certain highways that tell you not to hitchhike. Don't pick up hitchhikers.
That just seems
it's
like
a real problem.
It's like a bad.
Apparently, we invested in state money on signs.
Oh, okay. Well, the more you know. The other issue that I saw with the hitchhiking, it's a mixed one. So in California, it's illegal to have people ride in the back of pickups. This seems to have benches in it, but no seat belts, but it's open air. I don't think that's legal. I would need to dig into the vehicle code to know for sure, but it's one of the issues that I had with a bus doesn't have seat belts, but that's at least enclosed. Mm-hmm. This is not enclosed, so it's easy to eject somebody from the vehicle if there's a bump or it rolls over. There isn't the protection.
Star Wars loves having open air vehicles with no restraints. It just kind of burst into flames at the slightest impact.
See, you Northerners and West Coasters are watching this, and I just watch this as a Southerner, and I'm like, well, that's about right. That's just the normal. Yeah. How else are you going to get around? What's a seatbelt?
Yeah, as a someone who grew up in an agricultural town in Florida in the South, this is not surprising in the least. And actually, when I looked into it, there are exceptions. So there's either state law or local ordinances that will cover riding in the back of a pickup, so to speak, which is kind of what this is. It's not necessarily, like you said, Josh, a bus. It's not necessarily any sort of kind of transport vehicle, but you could also see this as you see similar vehicles in agricultural to move workers from certain locations in, where the crops are growing. So it's not surprising. So some states do have exceptions for farm purposes to move workers from certain areas. And fun fact that I found, apparently New Hampshire does not have seatbelt laws for anybody over the age of 18.
Don't tread on me.
Exactly.
Well, we'll do our best if you go through the windshield. But okay, my mom was a paramedic, so my bedtime stories were a little intense. And there's a good scared straight element of wear the seatbelt. And we don't see them wearing seatbelts on Freck's transport from the 70s. So good times. Now, when we get to the checkpoint, we get this weird issue of Leia and Ben are in the back of Freck's vehicle. And they were being asked by stormtroopers who were, I hate to use the phrase law enforcement because that's problematic, but they're being asked to step out of the vehicle. Normally, law enforcement can't just ask you to, there has to be a reason to detain you, a reason to pull you over. And they can't just pull you over and ask you to step out of the vehicle. There are a whole bunch of problems with that. And they're being asked to step out of a vehicle. And it's like, well, is there probable cause here? Or at least a reasonable suspicion? And Freck is,
yeah.
Because Freck is, I thought it was weird.
Yeah, I mean, because you're right, it only has to be, for a traffic stop, it only has to be reasonable suspicion, right? And
Correct.
Freck actually, I was curious about what people thought about whether Freck was a reliable tipster, that said that because he said that you may want to check these folks out. I found them kind of on the side of the road. It seemed fishy. And so when a person approaches law enforcement and said, and again, problematic to compare them to law enforcement, but assuming that those sorts of constitutional protections apply here, police officers can sort of rely on a tipster who appears to be reliable and have information about the possibility of a crime that might require investigation. That was the only thing that I could think of that Freck sort of said you may want to check them out.
Thomas, being the JAG officer and saying soldiers play law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, the two circumstances that came to my mind, A, would be something akin to a DUI checkpoint. So these are administrative stops that are found in most states nationwide, but at least in Pennsylvania, where I am, you've got sort of a 5-point checklist, right? They've got to be a valid DUI checkpoint. In other words, one where everybody's going through and the police are kind of quickly checking everybody. They've got to meet some basic thresholds, but mainly pertinent to this situation, for it to match up to like a valid DUI checkpoint in our world, it's got to be brief and cannot include a physical search, so they can't go through the vehicle, that sort of stuff. You've got to have warning about the checkpoint. That's why you see the big flashing lights and signs and whatnot. The decision to have a checkpoint in the first place has to have prior administrative approval. They can't just snap on their own, like a patrol officer just decide in an instant to set one up. The location and the timing of the checkpoint can be based on sort of historical knowledge about where and when intoxicated drivers are located. So they may have set up this checkpoint on the road on Mapuzo based on experience with smugglers or something like that. You've got to have sort of a decision that's uniform about which vehicles to stop. So you've got to have objective standards that are also prefixed, so you can't just make up the rules about who to stop and who not to stop. So if your decision is to stop everyone, you can't see your friend and just let them through. I don't know that this matches up with that because they pull them out of the car. And so typically, or pull them out of the vehicle. Typically, that's not going to happen at a DUI checkpoint unless you've given them reasonable suspicion that you're driving while intoxicated. I think the better matchup is the checkpoints that you find when you enter and exit some federal lands, namely military installations. It's known that they're trying to head back to the port of some type, and this could be sort of an outer checkpoint or a checkpoint along the way to a restricted area or in and out of a restricted area. certainly we see the some of the stormtroopers get dropped off near a facility, and that's not where Obi-Wan and Leia are trying to go. But if you head into any military base in the US, you're going to go through a checkpoint, and you're going to have to stop. And if you're a visitor, so if you're not carrying, say, military ID or the right ID, you'll actually have to go through a visitor lane. And to enter the facility, you are consenting to a check of your vehicle. And typically it's a pretty thorough search. They'll run your ID, the sort of the whole 9 yards. That's what this struck me as. The Kenobi maybe unknowingly is heading in a direction that takes him through some restricted Imperial areas, and they've set up sort of this administrative style checkpoint. It did amuse me a little bit that he's fiddling with the button on the laser gate. You could just walk around it if need be. I assume because he was thinking about stealing Freck's vehicle, but in any event, but yeah, that's what it stood out to me as.
Yeah, even if they were trying to, we'll just hop over it. It's still high risk. No one needs to lose a leg, by getting clipped. When I was a kid and crossing state lines, they would, it's now you can just drive to Nevada. There's no checkpoint. I remember stopping crossing, I don't know which state from California, and like they would stop and check people for fruit. It was time of fruit flies, and like we didn't want that spreading. So that I think has stopped everywhere. I don't think that exists in any part of the country.
I was curious about, because it still is that agricultural checkpoint on 80 between Tahoe, right at Tahoe, between Nevada and California, but we always just get waved through. We never, and there's people in the booth, like it's a manned checkpoint, but no one ever checks anything. It's the weirdest thing. So when you were a kid, did they actually stop you and ask?
Yep.
That's so weird.
So again,
got any illegal apples in there?
Exactly. Yeah. Tell us about your oranges.
Any Melu runs?
I've always wanted to pull up with just like an orange stuff in my face, like juice running down, just to see what they say.
Road trip. Anyway, good times. So we have that scene, and it's a wonderful scene because there's great character development. We can double back to that after we get through all the law. But we do have, right before that, we have the law enforcement officer talking to Kenobi and asking questions about why you're here. Leia does a great job of the cover story, and God bless that 10-year-old. This actress is awesome. Her line delivery and the writing for her, and being able to say, like, this is my dad, we're from here. Like, she's really good, and we'll see what she'll do later in life. But we have that non-custodial questioning. Who wants to hit that? One of you added it to the outline.
Yeah, I noticed that Gabby got into it a little bit more with the droid who's being sort of interrogated or questioned in a shop, but it struck me that they were also just kind of chatting up Obi-Wan and Leia in the back of the truck there, and as sort of Gabby points out later, and feel free to chime in too, Gabby, but generally unless you're in custody, there's no restriction on police officers just kind of asking you questions, just saying, hey, how you doing? How's your day going? Striking up a conversation. And of course, you always have the right to never answer questions that a police officer asks you. You can always walk away. And although you want to take a read of the situation, you want to be safe about sort of asserting those rights and sort of be polite and say, officer, I'm not in the mood to talk today, goodbye. And you can always ask police officers if you're being detained. And if that's the case, then even if they don't read you your Miranda rights, then you have a right to remain silent, you have a right to an attorney, and all those other sort of Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights. But yeah, it struck me that that they didn't have to talk to the stormtroopers, assuming again that the officers of law enforcement would be governed by the Bill of Rights, but that they do, and they lie to them. There's just like streams of lies about who they are and what they're doing. And of course, if you're lying to police officers, especially when they're kind of actively investigating something like in this case, a fugitive Jedi, that might be sort of perceived as an obstruction of justice type crime, where that might have sort of independent criminal consequences. But Gabby, what were you thinking about that?
Yeah, no, you always do have the right to remain silent. You never have, I mean, it's this interesting thing, right? Law enforcement will strike up a conversation with you, and you feel like because of their position that you are required to answer questions, and they may take on the attitude that you are required, but you're really not. You always have that right to just not answer questions. Really, the only exceptions to that rule is if a law enforcement officer asks for your name and asks you to identify yourself. You have to usually answer that question, but you are not required to answer any other questions. And I don't think they ask him, "Are you Obi-Wan Kenobi?" Like, they never ask him that question, so he doesn't have to answer. The only other question that he may be forced to ask is if he was driving and they asked him for license and registration, he would have to hand that over. But you don't have to answer questions. You can keep your mouth shut and hand over the documents, take them back, and leave. Mentioned, it's taking a read of the situation, being aware there may be other things, some kind of violent nature that you're aware of, that things may go south. Answer those questions. Not that there's necessarily a legal ramification, right? But that there person if you don't answer those questions, just because we've seen instances of that happening. Not saying that's all police officers, but that is something that is a real concern, especially for certain groups of people. But you always have that constitutional right. The only person who can ever force you to talk is a judge. At the end of the day, that's the only person who can order you to talk, and even then, you can refuse and be held in contempt and just keep your mouth shut in prison, but keep your mouth shut. So, you do have those really, like, it's a kind of, balancing test. But yeah, no. And we see the same thing, like Steven said, with the Ned B droid, right? He would not necessarily have any of the questions that those officers ask him when they come in, to search the droid manufacturing or repair facility. He could just, keep his mouth shut as he does. He doesn't have the ability to talk, but he doesn't have to, say anything and be like, get lost. So, yeah.
I like that as Obi-Wan ran his mouth long enough to tell the truth, and it almost got them burned.
He had a long day, pretty stressful. So, but yeah, he needed to. Yeah, it's just say dear, honey, some pet name so you're not going to blow it. I need to look at case law, but I think there's an argument to be made that this was custodial because they couldn't leave a moving vehicle. And I don't know if there's any examples on trains or buses with law enforcement asking questions, and if that would make it custodial by the very nature that they're unable to leave. And I don't know, because you can say, am I being detained? No, of course not. Then goodbye. Like, yeah, it's like, I'm going to bail out of a moving vehicle because that's not suspicious at all.
Let me just move over to this other corner and turn my back from you.
That's a great observation. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. The other layer here too is that Leia is obviously a minor, and the Supreme Court held in 2011 that when a minor is involved, the the interrogating officers have to take into account whether a reasonable child would perceive that they're being detained. I can't remember the name of the case. Is it? Anyway, they said that the police officers in the state argued that sort of the reasonable person standard applies regardless of the age when determining whether a reasonable person perceived that they were in custody. But the Supreme Court held that a child has different perceptions given sort of age differences and perceptions of authority about whether they're under arrest. So, although query whether baby Leia would ever let anyone tell her whether she could or couldn't leave. So I don't know.
Nobody puts Leia in the corner.
No, subjectively, I'm sure Leia did not feel detained, but whether objectively a child of her age might.
Yeah, not that kid. The point I want to make about her with the the shootout that happens when she's held at blaster point, the expression of terror on her face looks natural, and the way that she runs for her life to Kenobi, I thought was masterful, because the idea of like making that with like, okay, I need to look terrified and then scamper as fast as you can. And they did it, and it looked extremely engaging that you're worried about the kid. Very well done. I just, from a storytelling perspective, very well done, because it's hard with child actors sometimes, and she's very, very good. Now, defense of others. Tala, is it a hard A or soft? Anyone know? Tala? She shoots three stormtroopers in the back. I think she was right to do so, which means that we get to talk about defense of others. Who wants to take the first swing at this, or the first shot at the stormtrooper in the back of the head?
So when we talk about defensive, I'll put my conclusion up front. I don't think she was entitled to use deadly force. Her mind about using deadly force before the ramp ever went down on that transport. But because clearly she understood their situation, it seems like in advance of them getting there had clearly been some sort of transmission that had gone out. She knew she was supposed to meet Obi-Wan and Leia at a different rendezvous point, and that didn't happen. And so I think the dots connected pretty quickly, and she knew what she had to do. Generally speaking, when you're using force to defend another person, you have the ability to use the same level of force that they could use in defense of themselves. Here, there were blasters pointed at Obi-Wan and Leia, but it was to effectuate an arrest. And unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the circumstances, you don't have your ability to defend yourself with force against police officers is not at all the same as in any other situation. So the fact that you perceive that your life is in danger in the course of a lawful arrest doesn't automatically entitle you to use force. The stormtroopers weren't opening fire. I think even though they had their blasters up, it was they were getting Leia and Obi-Wan to surrender. Obi-Wan had thrown down his blaster. And so this is just cold-blooded murder, not anything else.
So this is where I'll disagree with you. One of the execution methods of execution is to tell someone to lie down face on the ground. And I learned that from my paramedic mother, from the calls that she had where people died. And if stormtroopers were telling Ben and Leia to face down on the ground, that sounds like an execution move. So I would say that she's justified in thinking that there's a lethal use of force is about to be used on Ben and Leia. So that'd be my counter argument on why it was reasonable for her to do so. I see Stephen and Gabby nodding along. So
if they had executed Ben and Leia, I think those stormtroopers would have been executed in kind by Darth Vader as soon as he figured out he was denied his torture.
So Stephen or Gabby, do you want to tag in with this? I'm going to go with silences. Let's move on. So we then get to Christy Peak brought in Jedi smuggling. Let's save that for her for when she can be back. And we have, can Ned B refuse to answer questions if he had the ability to talk? Who wants to hit that? Did one of you add that, or was that Christine?
Oh, that was me. That was what Stephen and I were talking about earlier, that he doesn't have the ability to talk, but if he did, he wouldn't have to answer any of the questions that these individuals came in to ask. And one thing I find fascinating about this, and this is just kind of a bit of a tangent, but about the Kenobi series, is they've given all the Stormtroopers different voices, and they're making it very clear that they have different voices, which
And
I find
genders.
fascinating. It's very different, and it's something you don't see all the time, and it's very interesting to me. So I find that fascinating.
It's been a long time since the 70s when everyone was a white dude from England. So, I mean, like, sure, that was their casting, but they, because that's where they were, but they've done a much better job of, you know, like, watching the subtitles. It's female stormtrooper, male stormtrooper, that they're making sure it's not a 1977 worldview. And I appreciate that, because it's 2022. Let's talk about Vader's killing spree. So I started a blog post on this, but just to highlight, we have battery of a father with the Force. Son comes out, son gets battered, and then his neck snapped. A woman's drugged through the street by the Force, and various other individuals are definitely battered by Vader. This is all murder. It's murder, battery, torture.
I mean, it's kind of par for the course, right? It's not just the men, but the women and the children too.
Yeah, he has a long history of killing kids, and he needed to remind everyone he will snap a kid's neck to make a point.
The Tusken Raiders, they don't forgive and they don't forget, man.
Nope. Watching this scene was like, it's like, this is Disney Plus. It's like, that kid just had his neck snapped. Like, this was as brutal.
It reminded me why I was so terrified of Darth Vader as a 6-year-old too, because he's the way that he is just like inexorable, like kind of walking down that street, and he can hear your thoughts, and he's gonna get you no matter what, and there's no place you can hide. That's why I was terrified of Darth Vader, and I thought they've captured that really well, and a whole new generation of very young children are now also terrified of Darth Vader, I'm sure.
Very Jason-esque.
Yeah.
This was a brutal killing spree that, and others just stand by and watch to stay out of his way. So again, when you look at the elements of murder, if you're inflicting great bodily harm, again, battery. But murder is the unlawful killing of a human being or a fetus with malice aforethought. Malice is expressed when there is manifested a deliberate intention to unlawfully take away the life of a fellow creature. Yeah, we got that. We got a lot of that.
But I would argue that while we have murder, I don't know if we're getting up to like first-degree murder, because I tend to remember, and if there is a criminal lawyer who would tend to disagree with me, that is fine. I'm going based on law school classes alone. But my recollection is that intent has to do with a specific person. To first-degree murder is intent, that you want to kill, like Joe Smith specifically. Like, you woke up and wanted to kill Joe Smith specifically. There are other lower degrees of murder, like depraved heart murder, that's just indifference for human life, right? That's second degree and lower. Did Darth Vader roll up on this planet thinking he was going to kill these specific individuals? I don't think so. I think they just kind of got in his way, and you know, he's just clearing debris. He doesn't, they're not even people to him. He's just, it's more depraved heart murder. And Thomas is laughing at me, but it's just clearing
I like
debris.
that characterization.
It's not necessarily, you know, a specific intent to kill this specific father, this specific son, this specific woman that's dragged to the dirt.
Yeah.
They're just, you know, kind of roadblocks to him getting to Obi-Wan. If he killed Obi-Wan, then yes, that totally first degree murder, hands down, you know, killing. He had the intent to kill Obi-Wan, but these other folks, maybe not so much.
Well, again, this is where the code matters. And if it's model penal code or whatever, you know, the state of Connecticut has versus California, under California law, I think the malice requirement's met. Because it's like, there's a person, I don't need their backstory. I just know that kid yelled, "Dad," I'm snapping his neck. Malice aforethought, done. Dragging the woman through the street, that's torture. And I remember from one of the Star Wars comics, Vader can feed on fear. So he wants people afraid. I don't know how many people are watching this, but I bet everyone is freaking the hell out. And Vader can feed on that.
It's like a protein shake.
Yeah. I fear
his pre-workout for battling torturing Obi-Wan.
Yeah,
I think there was intent. Now in Pennsylvania, there's a very, very limited temporal requirement. I mean, you can have the malice aforethought in an instant. It doesn't have to be hours or days in advance. The killings, the assaults, etc., those were targeted with the intent to draw out Kenobi. I don't know that he had any knowledge of any of these people individually or any particular hatred toward them, but he did make the decision at some instant right before that, as soon as he felt Kenobi's presence, because he's just walking. He's not killing everybody as soon as he walks off his transport. It's once he pauses and realizes Kenobi is in fact there, then he makes the decision to start causing some to clear some debris, because that's a better phrase than anything that I can come up with. And in that instant, as he's moving from person to person, I think you would, at least here in Pennsylvania, have enough to go after him for first degree murder of those two folks.
It reminds me of Empire Strikes Back, where Vader had Han tortured in order for Luke to feel it. And I think we have something similar here with, I'm just going to start butchering people in order to draw him out, because the Jedi are compassionate and want to help others. So it's sick, it's twisted.
And it kind of doesn't work. I was kind of shocked that Obi-Wan was just kind of watching those people get murdered. Yeah. And I guess he's like, because at that point he hadn't gotten Leia out of the way yet. So I guess maybe that's taking priority in his calculation of like what his mission is and what is most important there. But that was shocking to me that Obi-Wan was just like, oh no, someone else is dead. I guess I'll just hide here.
It's just pure fear. I mean, Ewan McGregor plays it so well that he had no idea what Anakin had become, other than this sort of, what he saw on Mustafar, but certainly not this, and how far he's fallen. And it's terrifying to him, even to somebody as stalwart as Kenobi is. And he's in no shape to fight an evil like this.
And Obi-Wan suddenly becomes everyone's 6-year-old version of themselves.
Yeah.
Like, it's terrifying.
Oh no.
Yeah. I mean,
he's also debris.
I would tend to disagree with that, because, at this point, Obi-Wan has to have known, that he slaughtered all the Tusken Raiders. I don't think that Padme kept that a secret.
She kept it to herself.
Okay. But to know that I think he was so shaken by the younglings. Like, I think to him, and to see, Anakin's fear, the rage in the Battle of Mustafar, like, to me, that would as to how far he'd fallen. And I mean, obviously he has Padme's dying words that there's still good in him, but like, I don't know. Like, I would tend to think he already kind of had this sense of who. I think it's more realizing that, you know, he may have created this person, that he failed as a mentor, you know, that he failed his charge and had a hand in creating this person, you know, because he really kind of advocated to train him despite others saying not to.
I think we're in the hero's journey moment where he'll snap out of it. Now, granted, he needs a lot of Bacta and one hell of a pep talk from Qui-Gon, but I think that's going to happen because thinking back to Return of the Jedi, we have Vader tell Luke that Obi-Wan once thought as you did. Well, right now he clearly doesn't. And after watching the video of Anakin slaughter younglings, Kenobi didn't feel that way. So that has to, I think it's going to happen between now and episode 6, where he's going to eat his Wheaties and, you know, get his Jedi groove back. But right now he's had better days. And I love the character of Talia with, I'll give Leia a nurturing hug after promising to, you know, teach her how to shoot and then go save the wandering Jedi. Like, this is working for me, but I like where it's going. We are coming up at the end of the hour. Oh, wow, there's one note here before we conclude. Did Kenobi have a duty to go out and save all those people from getting slaughtered? And who added that?
I just popped that in just because to reflect on my own sort of. I feel better now that you've sort of talked me down from my grief that Obi-Wan is so paralyzed by Darth Vader. That was really upsetting to me. But you know, sort of as reflected, not to end on sort of a tragic note, but as reflected in sort of current events, we know that, you know, the Supreme Court, of course, has held that law enforcement, and to the extent Jedi are kind of peacekeepers, and I think you observed that in the episode 1 and 2 discussion, Thomas, that, you know, Jedi, whether they're law enforcement, but police officers don't have an obligation really to protect people unless those people are in custody, unless people are in the protection, under the protection of the police. But police don't have an obligation to interfere if they see a crime happening. Really, it's really strange. But anyway, it struck me that Obi-Wan was so paralyzed by the observation of those crimes, he couldn't do anything. But anyway.
I mean, it's a reason for us to cheer for him, because if he was, you know, in his groove the entire time, that's a very different story. So seeing him get beat up and realize I have to snap out of my funk and remember who I am, and that, you know, he's still trying to do his job to protect Luke and now protect Leia, but he's got to get his groove back. So he's what we see in, you know, the Twin Sons episode of Rebels. So we're going to see that switch. I don't think it's going to be in episode 4, probably 5, but, you know, he needs to get his groove back.
A good drag through fire will do that for you, I think.
Yeah, he'll snap out of it.
The light of fire under his ass, like literally.
Yeah, he'll snap out of it and realizing, whoa, like my job's not done and I have to take action here. That said, we've covered a lot. Anything else before the good of the order, before we call it a night?
Is it Wednesday yet? No.
Soon, my friends.
Two more sleeps, or one more sleep if you stay up.
It's true.
For the next 40 hours. Yeah, I don't recommend that. No. That said, we get new Star Trek and new Star Wars on TV one night apart for the next couple weeks.
And we get new Marvel starting this week. So
this is true.
Like it's a good time to be a fan.
What an age.
For All Mankind resumes on Friday as well. So there's a whole bunch of genre that's really good. That's like nerds run the world right now. So like we are damn lucky that we get all this great content that we get to talk about. And maybe we'll talk about some of this at Comic-Con. I will neither confirm nor deny that. But with that said, everyone stay safe, stay healthy, above all else, stay geeky.